Welcome to the latest in my Soul Leader series with me, Rasheed Ogunlaru, coach, speaker and author. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Leroy Logan. Leroy, a very, very good day to you. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. And yeah, it's great being here. So thanks for the invite.
A real pleasure. So Leroy, this series is where I interview all sorts of people who I've met who are authentic, heart-centered leaders, as far as I'm concerned, from all kind of walks of life. Because what I'm really keen to really explore is how it is that we can all, wherever it is that we are in our leadership journey, whether we're aspiring to be a leader, whether we're an established leader, whether we're high ranking, low ranking, can be as authentic as we can as a leader. And we know that leadership can be challenging. And one of the reasons why I was really keen, when I was thinking about the people to interview, you came to my mind straight away, because you've been a leader in a very challenging environment, in policing, in the Met Police. You're somebody who's been brave and bold in speaking out and so on. You've also recently released your biography, which is here. It's a good read. I'm reading it at the moment. I highly recommend it. Leroy Logan, My Life as a Cop. But Leroy, how would you introduce yourself? How would you introduce yourself?
Local guy of Jamaican heritage, which I'm very proud of, and really knowing my culture, having spent a few years in Jamaica, even though I was born in Islington and grew up there, but I spent a short period of time in Jamaica, and it was a cultural masterclass, especially around identity, and that lived with me. So I always felt I was able to do whatever I want to do, and my parents gave me that support, and it led me to be a science researcher, a clinical researcher, straight after uni in the early 80s. And then the calling of policing sort of struck me from the blind side, caught me totally unaware. I did 30 years in the Met, and then eventually I retired in 2013, where I did a few things around the Black Police Association. I was one of the founder members of the London and the National, and a charity that I'm very proud of called Voyage Youth. That's still going. We set it up 22 years ago, and it's still going strong. So public service is still continuing, and I'm pleased that I've been able to own my story, hopefully to inspire others through my autobiography, Closing Ranks, My Life as a Cop. And the actual manuscript, before it was published, was picked up by Steve McQueen, the Oscar-winning director, who used it in one of his episodes called Red, White, and Blue, part of a 5-part series called Small Axe. And John Boyega played me as a cop, and he got a Golden Globe for his trouble. So really pleased that he's enjoying that accolade, and I need a bit of a cut from that, but we'll live in hope.
Absolutely, and we'll have to dive in on that. Actually, I can't help but ask, how did you feel when you saw? I get a sense, Leroy, that a lot of the time in your career in policing, and you rose up the rank, you were a police superintendent from my understanding, you were the chair of the Black Police Association that you touched on beforehand. And I get the feeling a lot of your career was about raising the visibility of lots of issues, not leastly equality. So did you find it kind of strange that somebody who spent time in film, that the entertainment business was the one that in some ways recognized that fight? How did you feel when you saw that story told on screen? And do you see any ironies in that? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, it was very surreal to know that my story could be a way of encouraging others to capture a journey in that time when racism was very in your face. The being called the N word, the P word, the W word, whatever, and felt that the story of being determined to show your grit and purpose and don't be derailed by people's prejudices or personalities, and just keep going, especially if you've got a vision of what you want to do and how your purpose is going to play itself out. So for me, encapsulating that and it being seen as a story that needed to be told on TV, still out on BBC iPlayer, Amazon Prime, so it's international, and it really was life-changing. And yeah, I'm a great believer of you'll reap what you sow. I'm not saying everyone's going to write a book and get a movie made out of them, but I truly believe it's the sacrifices my family and friends made to support me, my sacrifices in calling out the issues. And you know, I was on the target of so many forms of racism, and but I pushed through, and I suppose it's a story of hope. It's a story of, well, if I can do it, anyone can do it. But it is a story of facing adversity and being victorious in the long run.
There's so much here, Leroy, for us to zoom in and pick up on, and I do want to highly recommend to people, even though I'm in the early stages of it, this beautifully written book, Closing Ranks: Your Life as a Cop, which was compelling from beginning to read it. What struck me from when you were just speaking there, Leroy, is that many of the themes of people in adversity, inequality, and so on are very ripe issues for many people who are in public service and leadership to this day. And here you were from the 80s joining the police, I think 1983, at a time when for lots of people, Black, ethnic minority background, you know, that would be the one career not to go into. When did you first find that sense of public service? Was it in those formative years that you touched on, when for a while when you were in Jamaica, born, as you said, in Islington, and where did that sense of service and public service come from?
Well, I think it came from my parents. You know, they were hardworking people of the Windrush generation, so they responded to the call from the motherland as they saw it, and wanted to serve and to rebuild. My dad was in various forms of employment, but the main one he followed through was as a long distance driver. My mother was a seamstress, so you know, they came to give back and build themselves up. So I just mirrored what I saw, really. They just knew that, again, you reap what you sow. Work hard, you graft, you'll get those breaks, you will get those breakthroughs. I suppose the maybe subliminal message I picked up from my time in Jamaica as a primary school student was seeing people who look like me to be in position of authority, whether it's a police officer, a doctor, a teacher, up to prime minister. They all look like me, and so if I could see it, I could be it. And that masterclass in culture and my values and beliefs, because you know, it's a God-fearing society, very much so in those days, you know, and the schools instill that. So when I came back to London, even though I was race was now an issue, but I still had the vision very clear in my mind that I could do what I wanted if I worked hard, keep my focus, keep the vision clearly in my mind, and not to allow anyone to deter me. So that was, it was in my DNA. And I never had, you know, if I didn't have the parents that I was blessed with, maybe it could have been different. But they always encouraged me, and even when they didn't agree with me, but they were always willing to challenge me, but in a supportive way. and I can't thank them enough for that.
And it's interesting that in your journey, the first part of that career was in science. That was the thing that you were drawn to, but then you found yourself in policing. Do you think that was how did that, I'm trying to even form the question here. What do you think that was? Chance, fate, calling, necessity, happenstance? Because it's interesting, isn't it, when we see ourselves going down one line and it's so different. Tell us what's your take on that?
Well, I think it was ordained in some way. It was already set, because when I look back, especially with writing the autobiography, you get a sense of, you know, the journey. Does it make sense? Does it join up? And the cultural immersion in Jamaica and going into science, I actually also had a quite an amazing sort of connection with a police officer. I was doing my degree at the time, and I was sort of running from one lecture hall to another one, and I saw a black officer in a marked vehicle one summer morning, and it was like, it stopped me in my tracks, because I thought, wow, that officer, he's brave. Because this was in the sort of 70s, late 70s.
And this is in the UK now. And this is in the UK now.
Yeah, this is in London. This is in London, yeah, because I went to the University of East London. So I was doing my degree, and I remember seeing him, and I didn't speak to him, but I just looked at him in that vehicle, in his bright white shirt, on his black skin, and I thought to myself, wow, that he's such a role model, such a strong ambassador for the organization, and he doesn't know how much he's inspiring, just even if it's just me, just by just sitting in that vehicle. As I said, I didn't speak to him, but I suppose again that was just registering in my spirit about how something in the future is gonna present itself in some way. And I suppose in a lot of ways, when the people that actually taught me into policing was some local cops at Hampstead Police Station, where just up the road from the Royal Free. And it was in 1982. I was enjoying my career in clinical research, and these guys would use the sporting facilities in the Royal Free, the pool, the gym, the sports hall, all of these areas. And I'd meet them in a bar, and I didn't know who they were. Eventually, they told me they were local officers. And they started to say, well, it's important to have an organization that public can, you're a very outgoing, easy to know person. You've got the skills, abilities, qualifications. Ever thought of policing? And I thought, no way. I mean, my experience of policing was in London, Islington, where I grew up, was very tough with the sus law and how police use very draconian measures to criminalize so many people I knew. So that was my first impression. Do I look like a racist cop? But those images in Jamaica, the seeing the officer when I was doing my degree at UEL, they start to come back at me, and it was really questioning my sanity. I'm thinking, why would I take myself out of my comfort zone of science to go into a hostile, toxic culture of policing? Why would I do that? But that sort of intervention by those officers was followed up by my boss. Unbeknown to him, he didn't know I was talking to these officers, but he said, Leroy, it was at one of my appraisals, and in early 82, and he said, Leroy, yep, the work is fine, we get on well, but I don't think science research suits your personality. And I said, well, what does it look like? And he said, well, I think you could be a police officer. And I thought, is this guy following me around? You know, has he seen me speak to these officers? And he said, yeah, I just think it really suits you. And, you know, because he was talking about, again, the same sort of skills of communication and understanding others, being empathetic and sympathetic, and be, you know, a peacemaker type thing. So I was really struck by that. And I remember going back to Gretel, my fiance, who's still my wife, almost 40 years later. And I said to her, Gretel, you know, this has been going on. I need to share this with you. And Gretel's from Nigeria. She's born and bred in Nigeria. So she came over to London, where I met her as a student. And then, you know, we knew each other for about 6-7 years by this time. And I said, I don't know why people are thinking I should be a cop. And she said, I think you should. I think it really suits you. I said, Gretel, that's not the answer I'm looking for. I want someone to talk me out of it. But the final person to really just hammer this home was one of my closest friends in school, my best friend in school. It's a guy called Lee John. He's the lead singer of Imagination, and he's still doing his stuff 40 odd years later. And his mother used to be a community liaison officer. And she, I shared with her, I said, Mum, you know, people are telling me that Gretel's telling me, my boss is telling me, they're on my case at work when I see them in the bar. And, you know, she said, but Leroy, I think you could be good at this. Because, you know, we need to have people like you in the organization to change it. And I said, Mom, what can I do? You know, even though I could see myself in it, but I was struggling with it. And I must admit, I was questioning my sanity. I'm thinking, this is really going to test me in a way that I wouldn't really understand for a long time. Right. And it did.
And it did, and it did. And jumping in there, and it did, didn't it? Because we know, and I won't say too much for people who haven't watched the film or read the autobiography, but you joined, and around the time of actually joining, there's an awful attack, I think, on your father. So you're tested from the word go. I want to fast forward a little bit, Leroy. So you joined the police. You've talked about seeing people who look like you, and that I can aspire to that. You, through the police, particularly at that time, joining in 1983, you rise up, you eventually become police superintendent. You become, I think you're one of the founders of the Black Policing Association. You're chair of the Black Policing Association. You're a leader in many different ways. So there's a cluster of questions I kind of want to ask you around this. Leroy, can I just start off by asking the first question I want to ask you, and then we'll maybe come back in some of the complexity of this. What for you is leadership? Because at this moment, maybe I want to kind of almost speak to our audience at home. People who are listening to this, they're all sorts of leaders. Some of them are in public service, some of them might be public sector here, some people might be in the police, some of them might be in all sorts of sectors. And many of them might have faced all sorts of challenging, many of which that you've pointed to, you know, how am I, is this the right career for me? How am I going to move forward and so on? I want to find out, first of all, what for you is leadership, because you are a leader in all sorts of different ways and people look to you to be a leader. You've talked about the charitable organization. What is leadership to you?
Leadership is having a clear understanding of what you're trying to achieve. I'm a person that has to see the vision of it, because if I see it, I can do it. And bringing people with you, if it's really if it's genuine, people will attract to what you are about. And normally that's around being successful in it showing people the best way forward. Delivering public service was, well, actually, for me, understanding I'm a servant. I'm not into policing because of power and control. For me, I was a servant leader.
Mm.
And I was not allowing myself to be derailed by pride or any form of self-aggrandizement or being, put myself across as being arrogant because of the rank I had or the position I held or the influence I had. I remember an assistant commissioner said to me something really important. His name is Dave Vaness, an assistant commissioner. He went on, when he retired from the Met, he went to work for Kofi Annan. So you can know the quality of this guy.
The former head of the United Nations. Yeah, the former head.
Yeah, Kofi Annan, yeah. And Dave said to me, Leroy, recognize the power that you have. And for me, it was saying, be humble and be wise, because if you allow pride to get into this, you will go off target. You'll go off the path that you're set, and of course it will compromise you. So I that's how it came across, and not to make shortcuts. Don't take shortcuts. Sometimes it's a very attractable way of, oh yeah, I'll deal with that. But I found, especially leadership, is not so much what you do, it's also about what you don't do. Do you spend that extra time with people, communicating what you want to do, how you want to do it? Are you actually doing the sort of inventory within yourself? Are you clear in the message that you're trying to put across? And are you doing it consistently? And not just 9 to 5 weekends off. It's got to be 24/7, 365. For me, you got to live it. You got to be, if someone catches you on the blind side, oh, you're that copper. It's not like, oh, I switch into officer mode. What you see is what you get with me. So I couldn't allow myself to leave any gaps in between Leroy Logan, the leader, and Leroy Logan, the hidden person. It's got to be superimposed. It's got to work together. No, I'm not saying I was perfect. Yeah. I wouldn't say I'm perfect by far. The book highlights my imperfections, but I think the other thing that attracts people is understanding your vulnerabilities. I just so many people think leadership, you've got to be all things, look to all people. You've got to be the top of your game on everything, and people will. But sometimes it's your vulnerabilities that attract people. To say, well, listen, I can see that person is genuine. He wants to do certain things. He is lacking in certain things, but I believe it's something that I can add value to, or to the cause. Complement each other, and so I found that I didn't needed to be putting on this image of being successful in all areas. I could be extremely open and honest to say, listen, I don't know this. You need to tell me. How do we work this out together?
What you're saying here, Leroy, is absolute gold dust, and I think it really takes us to the core of, for me, that the soul leader. I want to touch on. I want to talk about authenticity, because again, and I've said it to you a couple of times, for me, one of the things that was clear from when I first met you, I can't remember, 15 odd years ago, that you work on a community piece of work that you were doing, was a sense of, and it's interesting, I love the way that you put this word service there, but there's a sense of, a quiet sense of kind of integrity and authenticity, just a blend of certain kind of, how did you find that? And the reason why I want to ask this is that we can find ourselves in environments in leadership, isn't it? In so many organizations where being authentic, being honest, being, doing a job well and caring and kindly with fairness and so on, those things which I get sense of, that can be really difficult and it can be tested. Leroy, how did you stay steadfast to that, particularly in an environment whereby you were experiencing racism, where if you put your head above the parapet, particularly as somebody as a black man in a predominantly white, so how did you stay steadfast to those qualities throughout your career, even though it is really unpopular? Because if I think about it, Leroy, the things that you were saying way back when are the kind of things that many of us as a society only have the courage to talk about now: race, equality, fair. There's lots of those things in our public services, including the police, that's still on this journey today, many, many, many years later when you flag this up. But Leroy, how did you stay steadfast to these qualities throughout really tough and turbulent times?
Well, I had to check with myself in that, have I got the strength of character to withstand the hostile environment I'm going into? And that doesn't mean I'm going to be challenging everything and being just burning myself out. You got to choose your battles wisely. And one of the things I speak about in the book is about having a warrior spirit, a gentle warrior, because that for me was really important to listen. When I do need to stand up for myself or others, invariably it was for others, that I mustn't allow people to think I'm just a walkover. Obviously, I'll be appropriate and professional, whether it's dealing with the public or my colleagues, because I was in a rock and a hard place. My colleagues didn't trust me. The community thought I was a traitor. I don't know what cause I was a traitor to, but that's how they viewed it. So it was it was a lonely road. But there's a book by M. Scott Peck around leadership, and just have to be ready for that lonely road.
The Road Less Traveled, is that the book, The Road Less Traveled?
That's it, The Road Less Traveled.
Yeah.
And that I remember reading that book, and in my early stage of my career, and I thought, well, that's me. And understanding that you might have to be constantly reviewing what drives you, the motives behind it. Because if you don't constantly review, you might find you've gone off track, or you're not doing it for the greater good, and you put your personal agenda ahead of the greater good. So that for me was really important, to get things balanced in a perspective that was constantly being reviewed, and not allowing myself the luxury of fooling myself. And that mental discipline, that reflection, that sort of spiritual dimension to it was really important, because I know that my faith was an anchor that held me in good stead, especially when things were really tough. Not just with my colleagues, and some were in quite risky situations. Even in the film, the Small Axe film, Red, White and Blue, I had to call on people to back me up, and they didn't come to back me up. So these are sort of things I had to be wise, so I don't go into a situation putting myself at risk or anyone else, and not being able to deal with the issues I was facing. So it was, I suppose, my spiritual antennae was always alert to how things were playing out, And some people say, well, you know, how can you do that for 30 odd years? Well, I suppose maybe it's how I'm wired. I found I was better dealing with the pressures by being alert to what could happen. I'm not paranoid or anything like that. I don't think I am, but I was always realizing that once you put your head above the parapet, you start to challenge. You're going to be on someone's target. You're going to be, you know, I'm not saying you're going to be seeing red dots all over the place, but you know that certain people will be aiming for you. And it even happens now on social media. You know, you put a post up, genuinely trying to be as objective as possible, and people will come at you. Well, I was getting that practically every day. From the first day at Hendon, when I said, oh, you know, I've come in to make change from within. Well, that they thought, oh, he's a troublemaker.
Did you say that? So Leroy, just on that moment, I don't want to interrupt. That's powerful. So from that first day at Hendon, there was that recognition. I'm here to create change from within. That's powerful. So I just want to play back to you some of the powerful themes that you put on the door, and I thank you here for. You've talked about service, and I couldn't agree with you more. That thing about that service. Because then it's about more than us and all of that stuff. You talked about that spiritual bit, whatever spirit might mean to each individual person. You talked about those particular themes. You talked about that reflecting and that kind of awareness. And I get a sense of that. What I get a sense of also from you, to really be an effective leader, there are going to be those times where you are going to need to put your head above the parapet. Because if you're but wanting to improve things, is that also fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially if you're in an organization where there's certain things within the culture, which are the norms and values of people, how they operate. It's not necessarily written down. It's just the way in which the environment is. And if you see that it's wrong and you need to step up, understand there's going to be pushback, and people are not going to be thinking the best of you. But I realized from a very early stage that I can't put popularity before my principles. Yeah, it was for me, you know, it wasn't something that I just automatically understood. It was through the journey. I thought, actually, and I've never been a person from school days, you know, because I always found other people really popular. Doesn't matter what I do, I'm not Mr. Popular. Hey, it's life. So it was easier for me to do that because I wasn't relying on other people to define me or to give me an assessment of who I am. So going into that policing culture, it was clear to me that I had to be very clear that in doing my job properly, I'm going to ruffle feathers. And if I'm going to challenge, whether it's racism, sexism, homophobia, whatever it may be, I need to be clear, concise, but intentional, and consistent with that. So popularity is going to go out the window.
You know, what you're saying here is a gold dust, Leroy. I wonder, I'm curious to know, can you tell me a little bit about along that journey? And I think one of the things that I want to put on the table here from what I get a sense of, clearly in that environment, because often people can think, okay, it was tough, things weren't achieved. Number of things were achieved, and some of those things you talk about in the book. You talked about Black Police Association and so on. There was some other initiatives around racially sensitive policing and so on. Can you tell me, what are some of the things that you are most proud about as in your career as a leader? And then I wonder if you might go on to tell us about, did you see really good examples of good leadership during in your career, and other people that you learned a great deal about leadership from? But I'm wondering what the things you're proud about your career as a leader.
Well, I think I'll answer the second question first. In terms of the leadership I found the most beneficial, I remember when I was a probationary officer, and my sort of parent cop, as they say, was a guy called Tony Brook, and I remember his name. I'll never forget his name, and this was 40 years ago now. And Tony was he was a calming influence. You know, when he was going into a situation, he wasn't escalating. He was de-escalating. He was calm. He was not trying to say, right, I'm the cop. Everyone stand back. I will deal with this. You know, if I need you, I'll call you. That sort of thing. He seamlessly assessed things so well. And invariably it's because he knew everyone, good, bad, or indifferent. He was in his patch near Upper Street in Islington. Because that was my first station at Islington. He knew everyone. It'd be easy to say who he didn't know, but if he did know them, he could assess them so quickly. It was amazing. So he gave me that foundation. I thought, that's the person I'm going to go with. And he was a career constable because you know, he retired in the sort of late 80s, and you know, I first met him in the early 80s, so he wasn't around for that long, but he left an indelible mark in how the style of policing for me. You know, he's your Dixon or Doc Green type person, but very effective. Don't get me wrong, he was not a slouch. He wasn't holding back. Because, you know, he looked the part. He didn't have a pot belly, or, you know, near the end of his service, he was a fit-looking guy, very charming. You know, he could talk someone into admitting, not stitching them up, but to admit, yeah, I did it. All right, it's a fair cop, gov. You know, that type of stuff. And so he set the template for me, because I knew it was there, and I was blessed with him giving me that ground, that on-the-job training that lived with me. So that was clear to me that, you know, even if I was challenging people, one of the biggest things to let your work, the quality of your work, speak for itself. So yeah, you know, I had to be operationally sound. So even though I think it would have been really tough for me to go out there and say, listen, you should do better in this, because when you're pointing the finger, you've got three fingers pointing back at you saying, okay, what are you going to do? And who are you to tell us? So, you know, your work, the outcomes, not just outputs, how many people you speak to, how many people you arrest, how many people you charge. No, I'm talking about outcomes, how many people you speak to or deal with, and how you change their lives, how you've improved, you know, not necessarily arresting, maybe it's diverting them, signpost them to something to help them in their education, employment, training, whatever it may be. So that for me was the outcomes of your work was critical in enabling you to be forthright and clear and laser-like and intentional in what I wanted to do to improve the environment for the greater good. It wasn't just for, you know, just making it great for myself, but no, I wanted it, everyone should benefit. I didn't want to be self-serving. I didn't want the BPA to be self-serving, and it never was, because of our aims and objectives was, you know, it wasn't just for the internal dynamics, but it's the external links with the community and building bridges and not barriers. So, you know, when you're doing these things, if you're operationally sound, if you know your oats, as they say, if you're able to show quality of service as a servant leader, that for me pushed back. And they might not agree with you, but they've got this grudging respect because he knows what he's doing. So don't try and bluff him, you know, just be clear with him. And in the end, as I went up the ranks, people started to say, well, listen, this guy is consistent. That's how he is. I mean, as a superintendent, one of the things I was proud of, and I was bottom of the class for throughout the Met, was the authority levels for Section 60 roadblocks. which basically is under the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act, where you, as a superintendent, as it was then, it's now reduced to an inspector, but you have to authorize officers' requests to do stop and search without reasonable grounds, which the government is trying to do now as a general change. But in my day, in the early O's, as a superintendent, I was bottom of the class because I used to say, no, you haven't given me enough information. You haven't given me enough evidence or intelligence to warrant demarcating an area where you believe there's violence going to occur or repeat of violence, and you're going to stop people without reasonable grounds because I'm giving you that authority to do that. And you know, I was Mr. Unpopular because they knew when I was on call, I'm going to be asking those questions to ensure that, one, you know your stuff before you walk in my office. Two, I'm not just going to go by what you tell me afterwards when you get that authority. I'm going to come out my office and check. So I would fool them. I'd get on my bicycle. I wouldn't drive the car because, you know, when you cycle around, people don't spot you as quick as they normally do. So I would cycle around and say, okay, well, let me see how this thing is playing out. And not just with my colleagues, but the public. Because if they're saying to me, oh, go and get harassed, I would say, okay, leave it with me. Let me just double check on this. So that's the pressure I put myself on to say, listen, I'm not just going to take it for granted that my officers are just going to play this out because I'm the one that signed them. Okay. So I suppose I got, again, from the day first week in Hendon right up to my final years, they knew what to expect from me. I'm going to ensure that they know clearly in their own head what they want to achieve, and I will be asking certain questions, that rigor, that grip, to ensure that we get the outcomes we want.
I think what you're saying, there are so many, you know, Leroy, you know, and before we close, and I want to try and squeeze in a few more questions, but what you're saying here is profound. There's so many, for me, absolutely profound and essential things. You've been talking about themes about we've got to know our stuff, we've got to know our rights, we've got to do the work and so on. I love the thing that you were talking about. It has to be in your DNA. You can't kind of almost stop, even when you're not. I have a saying to people that you're never off duty until you're at home. And even nowadays when you're at home, you might be on a Zoom call like this or whatever. But there's something about you've got to live it. It's got to be. And I often say to people that if somebody's really good at what they're doing, I don't need to see a gardener gardening. When I'm engaging them, there's something about that pours out of them. And I get that such a powerful sense of from you. And there's that saying, isn't there? You know, what I get sense of there from what you're saying, there's that thing, doing things rightly, but then there's doing the right thing that you're wanting to do, make sure that the right thing is being done, even if that's unpopular. I wonder, one thing that maybe is really important for us to touch on, and it might be some of the things on that second part of that question about the things you're most proud of, you might want to come back to, but maybe I'm thinking here, Leroy, that there might be, let's touch on, and you touched on it before, you talked about some of the inequalities, and of course many people know that you stood up for, you know, where there is inequality. I'm wondering, for people who are in any organization right now, it could be in the public sector, public service like you were, it could be in any organization where people are experiencing those things, be it racism, be it sexism, be it homophobia and so on. Have you got any advice for people who, like you, back when it was very, you know, when it may have been very unpopular or accepted that somebody might well be racist or sexist or homophobic or whatever, but things have changed now. But what would be your advice for anybody who is listening to this and perhaps they are, you know, they are in the minority, or that they are, you know, they're underrepresented or what have you, but they're a leader, or they're beginning their leadership journey, or they find themselves in a toxic environment? What advice would you give to that leader or that manager?
Don't suffer in silence. You really need to speak to people, even if it's to validate certain things in yourself, or what you are going through. Because I'm again, just going back to the question you're asking me, which I didn't fully complete. It was around what was the achievements that you were
Please.
proud of? I was proud that if I was supporting anyone, whether it's as their first line supervisor or through my role in the sport network of the Black Police Association, and I saw that they were able to stand on their own 2 feet. They have empowered themselves through the support and advice and guidance we've given them, so they can stand not only up to the hostile environment for themselves, but help others as well. So I think that was one of the greatest things. That sort of legacy was the greatest, one of the greatest things, to see people even now, almost 30 years later, doing exactly that, working towards a better working environment for all, not just for Black officers, working with the community for all and not just for Black people. So it you know, when you deal with racism, it helps with the issues around sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, whatever it may be. So if you're doing it right, people are willing to give of their time. So that was one of the biggest achievements for me. And so hopefully that will help people to recognize that sometimes you need to stand up. You've got to have that warrior spirit. You've got to have that strength of character to and it's not just for yourself, but it's also for that person that might be hostile towards you. Educate them that what they're doing to you is not right. And it may be something, and you know, we all talk about unconscious bias and racism, you know, especially with Harry talking about it.
Prince Harry,
Prince Harry and his book Spare and everything, you know, and what is with Meghan and all that. It's all part of the continuum, you know, because unconscious bias is in a lot of ways is like a feeling, you know. I know something is wrong, and some people will continue doing it unless someone checks with them and say, listen, do you understand just by those microaggressions that you do that you are, you know, you're belittling people and treating people with a lack of respect and dignity, and as a result of that, they're devalued and they are subject to your racist microaggressions. Do you understand that? You know, and it has to be clear. So those are sort of things you've got to get people to recognize that these things are happening, because you know you can be walking around with rose-tinted glasses and everything is great, and until such time someone gets upset with you, because I'm a great believer you can keep your head in the sand, but at some stage someone's going to kick your butt. You know, your butt's going to get kicked because just by the fact that you just happen to be in their way for whatever reason. Not that you've done anything wrong, but you're just seen as an obstacle. So it's just being able to recognize these things are happening around you. Again, with that spiritual antennae to widen your, you know, don't be myopic, widen your scope of vision. And so you can be more productive, because you don't want to be beleaguered or feeling, oh, I've just had enough, and leave the organization, especially if you know, you've gone through a certain amount of training and development. It's not, you spent all that time, you've invested all that time just to leave. No, understand that you're there for a reason, and it has to be consistent with the ethos of what you're trying to do with the organization, what sort of organization you're representing within the organization. All of these things, there's a lot to take on, but if you check with yourself, you know, it can actually present itself in a way that it's not a burden. I've never felt the work that I've done, it's a hobby. I find working with people is, you know, some people, all right, you might have to say, well, I can't really help them. We may have to agree to disagree. You might not like my style of putting things across. I apologize for that, but it may be someone else can help you. But, you know, I like the human factor. I like the interaction. I like, even when people are being quite, unreasonable, to say the least. And I'm thinking, well, is it me? Is it them? Where is the blockage? Where is that barrier? So I think in closing, the BPA, again, the vehicle, that critical mass of thinking, the Black Police Association, is that critical mass that we started with, very small, but we were all on the same page. We launched 94. The legacy is still on. One of the things, myself and two other officers gave evidence at the McPherson inquiry into the death of Stephen Lawrence, and said that the Met Police is institutional racist. I know we were on people's targets, but we had to stand strong. And as I said, own the issues that we knew we could contribute around recruitment, retention, progression. And so that gave us so much more strength of speaking truth to power on behalf of the Black community. So they weren't thinking, oh, they're just trying to feather their own nest. No, they saw that we were building bridges for the Black community, who have been downtrodden and devalued for so many decades because of the type of draconian policing they've been subject to since the Windrush generation. So these are sort of things that, if it wasn't authentic and it was clear and being purposeful, those things would have disappeared by now.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's going to be there sine die infinitum. No, but I really believe just the fact that we're around 30 years later, and also the Voyage charity was set up on young people's leadership to know their rights and responsibilities. We set that up over 20 years ago, and it's still going strong. Young Leaders for Safer Cities. It's now Young Leaders for Smarter Cities, Sustainable Cities. So we have these three clear areas: safety, sustainability, and smarter. That's what we want to do to ensure that we give back to our young people. So those things for me. It's the and how you're doing that gives me so much joy. It's not the rank. It's not, it's not even the book or the film. That is the thing for me, is how people own the story, get inspired by it, and go on and do what they need to do.
I mean, what you've said here is powerful. I just want to throw in one very last quick question, Leroy, and what you've said is powerful and profound. And it's really interesting, as I was listening to you, you can almost see this circle, isn't there? From, parents' generation, Windrush generation, strong values, putting in the time. I love that thing that you make, that point about, if you've invested all this time in thinking, staying there, making a difference, being there, and that responsibility. I want to just say, I want to end this with a message for anybody who's at senior leadership. And I get the feeling from the bits of the book that I've read so far, and I'm looking forward to diving back into it. You weren't afraid to have those conversations at quite high levels, including assistant commissioner level. What's your message to people who are senior leaders, people who are responsible for their organization, whatever type? Because what I get a sense of, that everything you've said applies to all of us, wherever we are in our leadership journey. But what I'm getting powerfully from you, Leroy, is that if we really own that we are here as a servant, and we have adopt that antenna that you've talked about, and that we live and breathe it, and so on, that we are going to then, probably by nature, we are going to be nurturing people and so on, but a message to people who lead organizations, because sometimes we know that it's key. That I often say to people as a leadership coach, when people often to do things, I'll say, okay, what's the commitment like of your senior leadership? And to test that, what's their appetite? Do they genuinely believe in this thing or not? But any messages to people who are watching this and they are leading, they're a director, they're a senior leader, they are around that table who are of the decision making. So they're either right at the top, or they might be a chair, or they might be, they are in that room and making those core decisions in the organizations. Any message to those leaders who are watching us now?
Yeah, don't live in denial. Don't live in denial that your organization is fit for purpose. And people say, well, we've got an open door policy. Well, maybe the environment you created doesn't allow people to walk through that door. So you need to get out and look at the outcomes and impact of what your organization stands for and is trying to do. And is that environment within your organization conducive to deliver what service or product you are there to provide? So denial, for me, is one of the biggest things I'm seeing in senior leadership, in policing, in politicians. They seem, it's the whole sort of fake news thing, the whole cancel culture that you see. It's just a question of being in denial of what really is happening, and building your own narrative to fool yourself that we're on the right track, and I suppose it's that sort of gaslighting. I mean, one of the things that I found out from policing is that the police are gaslighters in chief. They are really good at saying, nothing to see here, everything is well, don't worry, you're getting it wrong. But we saw that with Sarah Everard, the issues. No, we're fine, it's being dealt with. But only did we know that not only racism was rife, and there were safe havens of racist officers, but sexism was rife, misogyny was rife, and there were safe havens for predator officers who were being investigated for rape and other sexual offences. And unfortunately, it was during the Cressida Dick commissionership, and she was wedded to the culture, and she would never accept that the culture was wrong. She found it really difficult to even acknowledge when things had gone wrong, like the Sarah Everard vigil, and how the policing and the optics of that looked so bad. I remember her saying that, the Her Majesty's Inspectorate report vindicated it. Well, they will, because they're in the same sense of denial. I mean, you can't replicate that and say there is nothing there, everything's fine. It's like when she used to say trust and confidence in officers get dealt with racism. Well, up until yesterday, in the papers, it showed less than 1% of officers are complained against ends up in something where the officers might be sanctioned, or even words of advice. But less than 1%. Can that be right? And we try and instill in our young people in our Voyage program to complain if you see bad cops or bad policing. And how can we do that when less than 1% of complaints ends up in anything? So, be in denial. Don't gaslight. Get out your office or in your place of work, or even if it's an open plan office. Don't think your section of it is fine, everything is fine. You got to be discerning. Discerning for me, assessing in a very nuanced way. Don't necessarily just go by what a person says or does. Get as much information as possible to get a full assessment of what is happening in your organization. Please don't just go by an Excel spreadsheet, or an algorithm. I think the human factor is really important, because until such day, AIs are totally, all singing or dancing. I'm scared of that day, because if people are showing the signs now, and AI is not even anything where it should be, but I've already seen people being de-skilled from it, and being de-skilled from our algorithm. For an example, when was the last time you looked in say, all right, how am I going to get to point A and B? All right, I might have to know the area. Well, how many roads do you know now? Because everything's in here. You just tap in Google map or something. Now, I'm not saying don't use these things, but don't think it's the be all and end all, because you never know. The phone might crash, and then you have to go back to basics and know your area and your sphere of influence and the scope of things that you would like to influence in some way. So for me, denial, gaslighting, and knowing the impact of what your organization is doing and you as a leader. And the last thing, as I've said before, do not put popularity before principles. If you've got to do your job, do it right, do it for the right reasons, openly and transparently. And if that means that you're not Mr. Popular or Miss Popular, so be it. As long as you can look yourself in the mirror and say, listen, I've done the best I can, and I've done it for the right reasons. It might be the wrong outcomes, but you learn from that as well. So those are sort of things that I would.
Wow, Leroy Logan, I can't thank you enough. I think what you've said here today, as far as I'm concerned, is an absolute masterclass in not just leadership, but in authenticity. I want to thank you for all the stuff that you've done over the years, for within policing, within community, for the Black community, for people generally. And I love the point you're making about if you're doing good thing for one thing, everybody, the entire organization, everybody, whatever benefits. I just want to say thank you so much again. I highly recommend anybody interested in leadership or community, read your book. Closing Ranks, My Life as a Cop, watch the film. If people are trying to find you, am I right? LeroyLogan.com.
Yeah. All the W's, LeroyLogan.com. And I'm also on Twitter, Leroy Logan 999. See, I'm still institutionalized. I've still got 999. Please do not report crime on my Twitter feed. It is not there. It's not replacing 999 or 101 or whatever. So please,
I just want to close by saying.
Those are the sort of main things. And obviously, I'm on LinkedIn.
Right.
Yeah, just wanted to say I'm on LinkedIn as well, Leroy Logan.
Wonderful. And I just wanted to say one last thing, Leroy. Thank you for being, for me, when it comes to this stuff that I talk about, Soul Leader, I often talk about two things that for me are two sides of the same coin. You have that combination of real compassion, because I can tell you really care. You care about people, you care about society, you care what you do, and that courage. Together, they're very potent combinations. I just want to thank you again, and thank you for being so generous with your time, with your spirit, with your knowledge, with your experience, with your story today. We've had some tech issues, but it's all been great. The lights are going down. It's almost dark. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us, Leroy, and we just wish you all the best on your future endeavors. And thank you for being here with us today.
Yeah, well, I just want to say thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much.